Welcome back to Pen and Reel. I'm your host, Uncle Joel, and today we're going to be talking about the Justice League tie-in to Dark Knight's death metal, titled Doom Metal. You can tell right away, just from the cover, that the story is going to focus on Hawkgirl, Nightwing, Detective Chimp, and Lex Luthor. And this story takes place after the events of issue number 3 of the main event. I'm happy to report that this takes place after Nightwing regains his memory and he is more or less back to his normal self. And in order to highlight that, Joshua Williamson has the story start out with a young Dick Grayson when he follows Batman and first sees him teaming up with the Justice League. I feel like this sequence is incredibly well done, and it really shows the hope and the spirit of the DC Universe, despite the fact that this story is taking place in the Metalverse, and overall the spirit is of despair and hopelessness. And in that light, that opening sequence serves as a strong contrast for the rest of the story that follows. You see, we start with this spirit of hope, this sense of inspiration and drive to move forward, and immediately we shift to a world in ruins, and this devastation and this sense of hopelessness. The book does a decent job of setting up the atmosphere and giving you kind of a sense of where things are. But at the same time, I didn't feel like it gave me a strong sense of the state of the world. This is very focused on a few characters in one specific spot in one specific setting. So if you haven't read any of the main event, it's not really going to give you a sense of the scope of things. That being said, if you have read the main event, you don't really need it to reestablish the scope of things. And so here we just focus in on a few of the characters in a specific setting within the Metalverse. I feel like what Joshua Williamson introduces here does a decent job of really establishing that this is not the main DC universe, that this is the Metalverse. And that's specifically that the main conflict here in the first few pages, and that's Detective Chimp with the sword fighting against an army of Solomon Grundys being ridden and steered by an army of creepers. And so this really establishes that there's something very different and otherworldly going on that isn't in keeping in line with the typical DC universe. And the story presented here is done fairly well. I'm really developing an increasing respect for Joshua Williamson's writing. There's nothing in this issue that is too surprising. It's a fairly straightforward story, but I feel like that's actually one of the strengths of the book because so much of the main event is just all over the place and so fast-paced. This is good that it really slows down and takes time to explore the characters and explore the setting. I feel like this is presenting us with a very different side of the death metal story and is serving to flesh out the world, as opposed to a lot of other tie-ins for events that just feel tacked on. This actually feels important, and while not necessary to the main event, it feels like it's definitely adding to it in a way that's not superfluous. As for the art by Xermanico, it feels fairly typical. It's not anything too distinct or original. It feels very similar to a lot of other things that you'd see in DC or Marvel, but it's well done and it does serve the purpose. There were a couple panels that felt a little bit odd, and it took me a moment to really figure out what it was trying to present, but I think that's partly because of the costume design and the colors, so I wouldn't necessarily make that a mark against the art just for those couple panels. Overall, I enjoyed the issue. It was not as exciting as I was expecting it, but I do feel like the next issue is probably going to be a bit more exciting, as this one was very much set up for the story to come. I am looking forward to the rest of the story, as I feel like it's going to really delve into the characters a bit more, and that's one of my main complaints about the main event series, is not enough character focus, and it's more just on bombastic big moments. Whereas this story definitely feels very character-driven, and it's really digging down to the heart of the characters and how they feel about the conflict, which for me has always been more interesting than simply seeing all of the big, bombastic, explosive stuff. It'll be interesting to see this story going forward, how much it impacts the main event, and just how much of the main event will actually reflect on this. I can see this very much carving its own path parallel to the main event, and then later on tying back into it in a manner that very much helps support the main event, but at the same time allows it to exist and breathe on its own. So this first issue of Doom Metal, I would say, is just okay, not great, nothing I would rush out to buy. But I feel like with all of the setup here, the next issue can really kick it into higher gear and really show how this book can stand on its own as more than just a tie-in, but an actual second wing of the main event. But for now, the book's just okay. I'd say if you're on the fence about it, maybe wait until the second issue comes out so you can then gauge whether or not it's really worth your time. I believe next week we're going to be getting the Speed Metal tie-in, so be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss my review for that. If you could help me out by hitting like on this video if you appreciated it. And until next time, this is Uncle Joel saying, stay tangible.